Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're calling. And I know Samra in Islamabad, thank you for calling in. So it's 8 o'clock in the evening there. So we've got people all over the world calling in. Thank you for participating today in a really important conversation. We were talking earlier here about overnight sensations in business, and certainly one of the barriers to overnight success often are risks. You know, we hired the wrong person, something happened that we kind of expected, and maybe sometimes we don't expect, that sets us off track. And we fortunately have somewhat of an overnight success over a couple decades. Anurag Kumar, CEO of iTexico, very successful business person out of Austin, Texas. He happens to be in Bakersfield, California today, visiting a client. Anurag, thank you for taking the time, and also thank you for being a member of Global Chamber. Thank you for your friendship for these last couple decades, and we really appreciate sharing the risks and the challenges that you face that hopefully we can all learn. Thank you.
Sure. Hey, good morning, everyone. And I hope you can hear me okay. So my name is Anurag Kumar. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm a developing entrepreneur. I'm on my fifth startup, and Doug wanted me to share my experiences on operating in a new country, in a foreign environment. So I left my own country, India, at the age of 21 to come to US. And technically, I've been working in a foreign environment for the last 35 years. I've started, all my companies is based in US, but along the way, this foreign environment, US, actually became sort of a home environment. So 12 years ago, when I got an opportunity to run two companies back in India after 24 years in US, I did not know if I'm in a foreign environment or back home. Look-wise, I was home. Behavior-wise, I'm sure I was very confusing to the guys back in India. And when I started operating in Mexico 7 years ago, actually there was no confusion. They knew and I knew. But anyway, like Doug is saying, any action on our part, anything we do has associated consequences and associated risks. I just wanted to share some of my experiences in operating in a foreign environment, and specifically for today, I'll focus on Mexico. I'm doing IT services with teams in Mexico. It's not an intuitively obvious choice to operate out of Mexico, providing IT services. Typically people associate IT services with India, with Eastern Europe, and of course US. So I'll list down a couple of risks in no specific order. Spend some time on them and also how we dealt with it. And as an entrepreneur, sometimes you make gut calls. So in a lot of risks which I have seen, actually I still haven't figured out how to deal with it, and we just live by them and take a chances. Otherwise, we wouldn't be entrepreneurs. We would be maybe hedge fund managers or something. So the first risk when you go into any foreign environment, any new environment, is, I call it risk of the unknown. You don't know what you don't know. It's new. You're trying to take a chance. You have some gut feeling. You have no prior experience in that new country. And for some good reason, or for some reason, you decide to go there, which is what happened to me when I stumbled onto Mexico. Number of ways to deal with that. If you're very structured, you can do a lot of due diligence. You can find a partner. You can join a local, a chamber like Doug is doing. There are chamber chapters around the world, and specifically in the city or the country you're trying to operate in. There are a lot of advisory reports. You can spend a lot of money buying them and reviewing them. Talk to other companies, talk to media. It's good to be prepared, but you can't reduce all the risks, and you have to make a gut call. So that's the first risk when you get into any new environment. The second risk I have discovered is what I call the culture risk. Having grown up in India, there's a certain way you deal and operate in an environment, dealing with people, and then spending a lot of time in US, you start doing and behaving in a certain way. In Mexico, it is different. They may not look very different than us, but it is different. So one is about employees and culture. Whatever behaviors work in your own country may not work the same. How you greet people, what motivates employees, how do you provide them feedback? Do you shout at them? Do you cajole them? Do you give them money? Do you provide them financial incentives? How do you operate socially? For example, in US, we are quite conservative, and folks, we need our space. In Mexico, folks are very social. There's a lot of hugging and kissing and touching going on, and sometimes it makes folks uncomfortable when they're in that environment. It takes a while getting used to it, and more importantly, you don't know how to respond appropriately. The way I have dealt with all that is, I try to get to know folk on a personal level. Show that you care, you are interested. It's always okay to ask how to act and behave. When it comes to hiring people, rely on the local recruiter. Don't use your processes which work in US and try to implement them back in the other country. Eat local food. I see a lot of people not comfortable eating out, and that creates a bit of a risky environment to operate. People don't trust you. Dress like locals. They appreciate that. But don't be condescending or try to make fun of the dress code. Also, when you're operating in a new environment, we are in US, the richest country on earth with a great GDP and all that. You have to realize that per capita income in Mexico is 1/2 to 1/4 of US. And folks out there, they live, eat, and dress accordingly. Don't compare. Don't try to take your ideas and think about as an American over there. So there's a culture risk you have to deal with, and you have to be prepared if you want to operate successfully in that environment. And clearly there are financial risks. There is a lot of currency and exchange rates. When we started in Mexico, peso was around 12 peso per dollar. Fortunately for us, maybe not for others, it's now up to almost 19. So it worked in our favor, but it could have worked absolutely opposite. It could have gone down, and then it disrupts your pricing, and it disrupts your operation. I know folks in Argentina, for example, they have to adjust their pricing to their customers literally on a monthly basis to take into account the exchange rates. Laws and regulations. We have certain way of doing business in US. Mexico has their own way. One of the things we have learned is keep all the receipts. They're actually a lot more strict than us in terms of expense reimbursements and receipts. Funds transfer. You have to be careful how you do fund transfer. Don't send cash. Use reputable banks. Or don't hire some brokers who promise to give you better exchange rates. There's a risk. There's a big financial risk. When you send money over, you first send your own money to this broker. If he or she doesn't transfer it over, you may not get your money back. And sometimes we are talking millions of dollars at a time. Taxes and reports filing, especially under the new tax laws in US, you have to be really careful how you manage your taxes. Subsidiaries are now more integral to the US companies. Imports and exports, a lot of equipment will go back and forth. Make sure everything is tracked with. So how do you deal with financial risks? What I've learned is don't try to be a hero. Don't try to do it yourself. Don't read something on the web and implement it. Get a good global banker. Get someone who knows the two countries. And Doug has made a lot of introductions to us. And that's one of the values of something like the Global Chamber. You can get some contacts. Hire a good accounting firm. In Mexico, it did cost us a lot of money, but we hired Ernst & Young, and they really helped us out with transfer pricing. And of course, have a good legal firm with experience in both the countries you're dealing with. We have learned to do extra tracking of all our actions, all our activities. It's better to be safe than sorry. And operate within a budget. If there are exchange rate fluctuations, you have to have a contingency plan. The other thing we have learned is keep the local budget separate. Deal with the country budget in Mexico, keep it separate. We have learned not to convert currency on the street. But the other thing we have learned is think local. Don't be an American in Mexico. Things like tipping, showing off, overspending. Sometimes we tend to convert very widely. We think $1 but the dollar is 20 pesos. So we are tipping in numbers, 1, 2s, and then we are converting, and it creates a lot of confusion. And sometimes you can overspend. I had experiences with one of my customers in India when I was there, and she was from UK, and she was tipping in pounds on a rupee bill, and she tipped almost 10 times, I think twice the amount of the bill itself. So I had to kind of point it out to her politely. And the small thing like, make sure you're carrying sufficient cash. Not all the places take electronic transactions. So that's a financial risk, and I'm kind of going a little fast. The third risk is communication risk, language. They say information is always lost when you translate. You can never have the same conversation if you're translating. If possible, try to learn the language of the local country, or have someone you can count on. Google Translate can only carry you so far. So make sure the communications are happening where you are understanding what they're saying or they're meaning to say, and you're not doing something. And that's in my view, that's a big risk. Context in communication is really important. How they think, how they feel, the intonations, the voice. So you have to understand that. One of the things I found, one of the reasons I got invited to run a company in India, it was a subsidiary of a British company. And the lady who ran that company told me that, Anurag, I can understand my team in India. I don't know if they're lying to me or not. I can read their facial expressions. You're the only one I can trust who can actually tell me what's going on. And that's important to realize that. With anytime you have a communication misunderstanding, it does create a personal or a business risk. You may misunderstand something, do something which can cause physical risk, or even worse, or a big business risk. You may make a decision because you misunderstood, you signed a contract, and sometimes it's too late. Since you are in Mexico, I do want to just touch on the security risk. Although I heard someone is from Islamabad and something happened in, I think, Karachi yesterday on the security side. You always need to be careful in a new location, whether it's Monterey or Minneapolis. You just have to know the environment. Still, I'm in Austin, which is next door to Mexico. I just want to remind people that no one is after you just because you are from US traveling to Mexico. There is no effort going on to terrorize US citizens when they travel to Mexico. No, there are 120 million human beings living in Mexico, and they live perfectly normal lives. It's okay. Everything is okay. Don't be paranoid. They're not after you. No one is after you if you go there. Still, if you look vulnerable, you do create risk no matter where you are. And then get local perspective. Your friends over there, they know where to go, where not to go, and try not to be bold. If they advise not to go into a certain area, just listen to them. And of course, at a bigger level, once you do really, really well, you can hire personal security guards. I have not felt any need for that. In Mexico, maybe because they realize I may not have much to offer anyway. But still, it is something you have to be aware of. In Mexico, I have women employees going there all the time. I haven't experienced anything on the business or personal side. But still, you have to watch out. Traveling, it's not quite a risk, but you have to be aware that everything takes longer. Traveling in US is usually smoother and predictable, especially for us. We know how long it takes to check in, how long it takes to fly, and typically how much are the delays. So it's good to know local travel rules and procedures. Airline check-ins are always different everywhere. Car driving, you have to be aware of that. Tolls are typically in cash. There are no electronic metering going on. Parking is always a little challenging in most of the parts of the world. Fortunately, in Mexico, you drive on the same side. So at least you're not going to run into a car coming from the other side. But always budget extra time.
Hey, Anurag.
And then there is I'm out of time.
Are you there? How's travel in Bakersfield? Is that like a foreign country as well?
It feels like you're driving in Mexico, except the lanes are wider, and it's the same. I have a couple of employees from Mexico traveling with me, and they were telling me that they sold California to U.S. in 1810, but it feels. I said, sorry, too late now. Anyway, let me just quickly. So there are business risks. How you sell your products there, how you make deals. In Mexico, it's more high-tech, more relationship-based, not as much rule-based, but trust-based. Things are not as black and white. There is a political risk. There's a new government going to be coming this fall. Just have to make sure you have contingency plan, have an exit plan. We try to keep most of our funds in U.S. We don't try to keep a lot of funds outside of U.S. It's more predictable. Laws are a little bit easier to enforce. And finally, I just want to talk about partnership risk. I know I'm out of time. Partnership risk, I have a partner in Mexico who owns part of the business. And I think I might have gotten lucky with a partner. We are still partners after 7 years. In partnerships, you need to be flexible, you need to be understanding, you need to be fair, and you have to be open. And don't assume that they don't know or try to be smart or try to outsmart them. Partnership is trusted relationship. You need, at least in our case, we needed him. I need him. Some people don't do partnerships. They hire a lot of people there. But there is a risk if you do try to have some partnerships. And finally, always have an exit plan. If it doesn't work out, make sure all your eggs are not in the same basket. And I'm out of time. I'll hang out there. And I'm sorry I took a bit longer than I was supposed to do. But hope this helps. And I'll be open to any questions, suggestions, comments.
Thank you.
Back to you.
I appreciate that. And this is back, we're now in Scottsdale here. This is Doug. And we are going to move on to the other speakers, but I want to encourage everybody that's watching live that we have a couple questions already in, and we'll get to those questions at the end. What I asked then of all five additional speakers, the expert speakers, try to stick to 4 to 5 minutes, and so that we can, because Leighton is last, and we want to make sure that Leighton gets on there for sure with credit safe. Because our first speaker is going to be Meredith Wilson, our first expert speaker. After Anurag, Meredith is CEO and founder of Emergent Risk International. She's calling in, I think, from Dallas area today, but you're really around the world all the time, and you can talk a little bit about geopolitical risk and some of the other kind of macro risks that businesses face as we cross borders. Thank you very much, Meredith, for your membership, and thank you for your expertise.
Thanks, Doug. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
You hear me? All right. So this is going to be kind of around the world in 5 minutes. Usually I take a lot longer. I can be very verbose, but just very quickly, my background, I used to work for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Went from there to private sector and built strategic intelligence functions in a couple of oil and gas companies, and then went out on my own a few years ago. So I am also learning the entrepreneur thing as I go, and it's been incredibly fun. I'm going to go from Kumar brushed over a lot of the micro risks to business. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the macro stuff that we're seeing in the news a lot right now. I'm going to start with North Korea, and if you could just go to the next slide for me, Caesar. There we go. So I'm not going to say everything that's on the slide because it's on the slide and you'll get it later, but And I'm not going to give you too much background on North Korea because everybody kind of knows the North Korea issue. The key points I want to that I want to talk about, as far as this being a major risk to global trade. My husband asked me last night, well, why is that a risk to global trade? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The kind of key points that I see here. One is that any kind of Asia-based confrontation is going to lead to market crashes in both the U.S. and China, most likely. The damage to international supply chains from a major confrontation, that can be anything from actual physical barriers to getting things in and out of seaports from South Korea, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, any kind of importing and exporting that's going on in that theater. And then the third one is, and this one I think is probably the most likely thing we're going to see this year. I'm actually pretty, I really don't think we're going to have a major physical confrontation with North Korea this year. But I do expect to see an increased threat of cyber attacks on international companies. Whether you're a large company or a small company, I anticipate that there will be more of that. And in fact, particularly the small and medium-sized companies, the suppliers, the ones that are somewhere in the supply chain of the bigger companies are likely to be at more risk. And North Korea is one of the most I would say dangerous actors when it comes to attacking global, everything from global banking to major companies like Sony. On to China, or sorry, we're on Mexico now. So the next one is the NAFTA negotiations. So right now, the U.S. is in, I think, the 5th or 6th round of NAFTA negotiations with Mexico and Canada. Some of the main concerns there. U.S. is concerned about balance of trade. That's what you're looking at right now on this graph. So you can see that since NAFTA came into effect, the U.S. balance of trade has gone wildly out of whack. Now, it depends on who you ask whether or not this is really an issue. We do a lot more services. We import a lot more goods. But the U.S. is very concerned about this imbalance of trade. What's likely to happen, it is possible that the U.S. will pull out of NAFTA initially. I don't anticipate that that will be a long-term thing. I would see that as a bargaining chip where the president may say, nope, we're done with NAFTA because we're not getting what we want, and then ending up coming back to the table and getting a better deal, shall we say. But in the meantime, there's likely to be a lot of risk, particularly for smaller companies that are importing from Mexico, that are building things over the border and then importing them back into the U.S. Some of the big things that I am particularly concerned about, agriculture, automotive, manufacturing being the major companies at risk, or the major industries at risk. Technology as well. We do a lot of technology manufacturing over the border. I think, what the hope is on the administration side is, can we bring more of those manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.? The problem with that, of course, the risk for U.S. companies, particularly smaller companies, is that labor is exponentially more expensive on the U.S. side of the border. So if we do bring those jobs back into the U.S., there's a good chance that most of those are going to be automated. If that is the case, both of those things raise the barrier to entry for smaller to medium-sized businesses. So if you want to manufacture technology parts, if you want to make T-shirts, it's going to be a lot more expensive for a business in the U.S. to start a company making T-shirts in the U.S. than it is for that company to start the business in Mexico. If the U.S. gets what it wants on NAFTA, the barrier to making things in Mexico and then re-importing them to the U.S. will get higher and more expensive. So for small to medium-sized businesses, that's where I see the primary risk there. A couple of mitigating factors there that we should consider. Much of the president's base of support is in U.S. border states. So Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, all of these states know the value that NAFTA has brought to these border states in terms of just sheer numbers, how much of each state's GDP is accounted for within that NAFTA agreement. Looks like I need to switch over to China now. So what you're looking at here on China is U.S.-China, the potential for a U.S.-China trade war, which we've been talking about for a while. And of course, trade war is one of those kind of buzz terms that we need to be careful with. But what you're looking at here is U.S. import and export volume, China and the U.S. over time. And what you see is the U.S. has grown a lot slower in terms of what we export versus what China does. The really big differential is in things like metals, also technology parts, manufacturing. Those are the really, really big differences. And again, this is where the U.S. is saying, hey, we have a major trade imbalance that we need to address. Again, we look at kind of the same issues that we have with NAFTA. If we see a trade war, we're likely to see prices on anything made in China and imported to the U.S. go way, way up. Now, keep in mind that 34% of global supply chains originate out of China now. So, if you look around your desk, probably 60% of what's on your desk has some parts made in China, if not more. So this would raise tariffs for companies wanting to import products from China. Again, these are sometimes the smaller companies that are either importing parts or importing small widgets, shall we say. And again, the barrier to entry is going to get higher for these smaller companies because of the tariffs that we might start levying on some of these things coming in. One thing we've already done is levy tariffs on washing machines, metals, things like that, in an attempt to make the U.S. metals industry more competitive. So it looks like my time is up, so I'm going to stop, but I will be happy to take questions at the end or whenever you'd like to do that, Doug.
Thank you, Meredith. I appreciate that. And keep the questions coming in. Thank you for the questions that have already come in, and we do get to those. I'd like to shift now, not in the order of on the list of the bios, because I'd like to go to Trevor Jones. I think you may be in Denver today or in Colorado, but let us know.
Doug, I'm actually helping a client in New Orleans, Louisiana today.
Uh-oh. Hey, wait a minute. So it's Fat Tuesday, right?
Yes, you've put the pieces together. You can probably see the bags under my eyes. My business and leisure trip corresponded with Mardi Gras quite well this time around. So you're not wrong.
What an amazing coincidence. So, so Trevor can talk about some macro trends as well. And I know you were going to talk about AI and some other things. So we look forward to hearing some of the risks that you see out there.
Sure. I think Anurag and Meredith both did an excellent job kind of covering both macro and micro risks. And, I think those of us in the risk industry, we like to get together for coffee and talk about these kinds of things because they can be quite expansive subject matter wise, and there's always growing risks in all of these kind of sectors and some of the risk verticals that both Meredith and Mr. Kumar mentioned. So that was great. I think what I'd like to talk a little bit about during my 5 minutes is how we measure risk and how some of the new technologies and tools that are coming online can help risk professionals such as ourselves kind of look at these risks more rapidly. And part of the tools that you can use as a part of this new kind of technology set is machine learning and artificial intelligence. So the first thing to get out of the way is that artificial intelligence is probably not quite as scary as most people imagine it to be. Most people will remember last summer when I think Mark Zuckerberg was saying it was going to save humanity, and then Elon Musk was saying it was going to destroy us all. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Just so everybody knows, we're very far from things like fully autonomous weaponry and that kind of thing. Not to say it doesn't exist, but it's not quite the doomsday scenario that most people think of when they think about robots. What AI can do and what machine learning can do is speed up the rate at which we're analyzing some of these things. So, as the speakers will all know, and as anybody in a C-suite position, or especially a chief risk officer or somebody like that, they know that there's too much data right now, right? Between all the data we're getting from the Internet of Things, sensors all over the world, social media, not to mention the internal data that companies, have on hand. There's just too much to kind of analyze and create these quick statistical regressions. So everyone's kind of familiar with big data and statistical regression and statistics from high school and that kind of thing. A good way to think about artificial intelligence is statistics on steroids, right? So we can take risk data from very disparate sources. So, Meredith mentioned North Korea and that kind of situation. Let's say we wanted to monitor shipping traffic as it pertains to different political conditions as a leading edge indicator for conflict in North Korea, just to pick an example. Well, artificial intelligence could rapidly ingest data about both political risk, shipping positions, shipping lanes, much faster than a manual analyst could. And so, as you might expect, this is also technology that the intelligence community and the security communities are quite interested in because they have too much data on hand as well. And so at Lynx, we work with both the private sector political risk vertical, and we also sell technologies to governments because this is something they're quite interested in as well. But so as you can kind of see, there's too much data. We can rapidly visualize it. Here's a bit blur. Forgive the blurriness here, but this is a risk map that Lynx has produced for. This was a government client interested in looking at terrorist attacks in Libya, for example. So we've used a artificial intelligence big data ingestion engine to map where not only terrorist attacks are in the red and yellow dots from 2010 to 2016 in Libya, but also where the hospitals are in blue. And then the green is actually agricultural areas. So this particular client was interested in how agriculture mitigates, food security mitigates terrorist and insurgent activity. So we're able to map this quickly so you can see it quickly on your phone or on your iPad and see the data right in front of you. But the point is that you can visualize vast amounts of data that you otherwise wouldn't be able to kind of ingest and process as a manual human analyst and see it quickly on your device like we all like to do with other technologies. Lynx believes you should be able to do that with risk as well. And we can map quite a wide range of risk sectors. So whether it's kind of the cultural risk that Kumar mentioned or maybe kind of a harder risk like some of the risks Meredith was mentioning, we can tackle that in terms of visualization. So yeah, all about ingesting lots of data, but quickly interpreting that data through visualizations. Yes. Do I have minutes left? There's no way I was short.
You're right on it.
Perfect.
Thank you, Trevor. So we've got Trevor Jones of Lynx Global Intelligence, and normally your day-to-day is around the world, but I think you're based out of Denver, and today happened to be Fat Tuesday, and so lo and behold, you've got the flexibility to be in New Orleans. That's awesome. We've also from Anurag Kumar of iTexico and Meredith Wilson of Emergent Risk International. One of the things that Anurag mentioned early on when he talked about risks were financial risks and issues related to that. So our next three speakers are all related to those areas. I'd like to go to Washington, D.C. with Phyllis Riley. She's the Director of Business Development at Tempus. Phyllis, you are involved in a variety of things, particularly around foreign exchange and making sure that companies mitigate and manage their risk relative to currency. Thank you very much for taking your time today, and thanks for sharing your expertise.
Sorry, I had to unmute. You're very welcome, and thank you for having me be a part of this panel. This is all good stuff. I will say, as Meredith mentioned, you will be sending this out later, but I also, Doug and Cesar posted a blog I did last week, which also hits on a lot of this stuff, so that's on the Global Chamber website. But I am going to move rather quickly through this. It's a lot of information, and there's a lot to think about when thinking about working in international markets or working with a vendor, a global vendor. So 4 things I think you need to think about when you're looking for going global are the currencies, the country that you're working in, the timing of when you need to get payments there, and options you might have based on that. So when you think about the currencies, people just think, oh, currency is not a problem, or I'll just work in the U.S. dollar. Well, the thing is, once you step out of the U.S., there's volatility. There's currency risk. So if you are not managing that currency risk, your customer or your vendor or your overseas operation is managing that currency risk, because it's there, okay? And if you're not thinking about that in terms of working with global customers, you are possibly creating a less than competitive situation for yourself, because European competitors will take global currencies. The thing with regard to the countries is there's major markets and there's emerging markets. You want to know which one you're in, and that's not necessarily always apparent. So you want to ask and consult. And then you want to have a strategy for that. So what affects the FX market? Central bank policies in each different nation, risk, like Meredith mentioned about, and Trevor mentioned about North Korea. When things shake up, when elections take place, we have elections coming up in Mexico, we have state-level elections coming in the U.S., those things can shift the market, and rumors move the market. So there's always volatility, and it's always very exciting. So the currency market is $5.2 trillion a day. That's a lot of money moving back and forth. And again, the markets move and change in ways that a lot of times are not anticipated. Cesar, could you move to the next slide if you don't mind? Okay. So this is a nice snapshot. There are different ways to work with currencies, whether you're an importer or an exporter, whether you're funding overseas operations, whether you're repatriating funds. So there's the interbank spot market. The spot market is where you buy today and you have it sent out, and it's standard delivery, okay? Then there's forwards. Those are hedging products and ways to manage risk in the market. Market orders are the same way, and then you can also have holding accounts. So a spot market, there's no one price in the currency market, okay? And you need to know that. You need to know. So if all of us logged on right now to buy Apple stock, right this minute, we'd all pay about $1.60 a share. If all of us logged on right now to buy a euro, we would all see a different rate, and it can be a swing of 5 to 7% as far as what we would see. And it doesn't matter how many euro we're buying, or if we buy that amount every day, every week, or once a year. There's no rhyme or reason. So you need to understand what your needs are. You need to understand the market. And then hedging is a way to manage that risk. So hedging is not a dirty word. It's not gambling. It's really saying I'm buying a big piece of equipment today from my factory floor. I'm not going to take delivery for another 9 months. From a treasury perspective, from my books, I want to know exactly what the rate of exchange is going to be throughout that whole time. And that's when you want to talk about a standing order, where you might want to put a market order in and say, I really like this rate, and if it can hit 24/7, you own it. I've had clients hit $500,000 at 4:30 in the morning at a rate that disappears as soon as it hits, to their advantage, and it's a great thing. So standing orders are very good. Forwards, you can roll it out if you can either have a specific date forward, which means I'm buying the currency today because the market's great, but I don't need the money until the end of April. Okay, that's a specific date forward. You can do that. It doesn't cost you really any money. You lock it in. You pay when you take delivery of that forward. Then there's window forwards, which you can take multiple deliveries. And then we also have foreign currency accounts. So you can buy on advantage and hold, or you can receive and hold the funds and wait for a good time to pull those. So this is a graph of simple timing on hedging and why it's advantageous. So your big risk in the market is timing and events that might fluctuate, and your risk goes up the longer out you go. So you decide today you have a budget and forecasting in place for going global. You have you have an invoice and you need to make the payment. So that can go out quite a ways. So Cesar, if you could go to the last slide. And I don't have my last slide. Okay, so just very quickly, these are some questions I think you might want to ask yourself when you're going global. You know, so will your vendor agree to be billed in US dollar and their currency? This is a question you can ask. Why would you ask that? You would ask that because today you might need to make a payment in Mexican peso, and it might be to your advantage to do that, right? But if you have to pay in US dollar, you can also look at that, and you can work with your currency specialist to find out exactly how much that will be. So there's plenty of options out there, and again, a lot of detail to cover in 5 minutes, but it's always volatile, which makes my job a lot of fun, and that's about it, other than digging into deeper details.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. We appreciate it. Hang on. We've got some questions for you. We do have 2 more speakers. Our next speaker is about an hour away from you, and that's Mike Kelly. He's international risk consultant at AHT Insurance. And what's really cool about AHT is for global companies, there's a whole series of risks that we largely haven't talked about that they handle. And so, Mike, thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise today. Look forward to learning more.
Thank you. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit different than what everyone else has talked about, because it's really focused on the end traveler themselves. That could be you, yourself traveling, or that could be how you prepare your organization and your staff to travel. And you'll see duty of care on the slides, and duty of care from a travel perspective is quite a bit different than the duty of care a senior executive has to the organization. Duty of care to a staff or traveler is basically how do you prepare for them and how do you care for them in the event when they travel or if something happens overseas. And when I say something happens, items number 1 and number 2 here are by far the 2 most likely things to happen. Number 1 in particular, and I can go back to Anurag's example in Mexico. Everybody says you don't drink the water in Mexico. Okay, that's because there's a high likelihood that you're going to get some sort of protozoa or pathogen. You're going to become severely dehydrated, and you might need some sort of medical attention. And there's a lot of things. There's a lot of items that can go into that. But the issue is when we travel as lay people, we tend to think about the really big items. We tend to think about terrorist attack, natural disasters, and you can see they're on the list. They're absolutely risks. However, the mundane, or what we would call the routine, are really much more likely to happen to people than a terrorist attack or natural disaster. The challenge from an organizational perspective is that it cuts such a wide swath across the organization. If someone happens to become sick or injured, it can involve human resources, operations, security, finance, and legal. So mustering the appropriate response at the headquarters level is extremely difficult when that requires such a broad cross-section. The other aspect, too, is if someone becomes sick or injured while traveling overseas, there are as many as 11 different insurance policies that could respond. If they're working, if they're not, if they're traveling for leisure, if they're traveling for business. So what you see is this kind of large melting pot of all of these disparate individuals' policies and procedures that are supposed to take care of people, and it can be incredibly confusing to figure out and respond. So before travel, and this comes back to what Anurag said about Mexico being largely safe, which I will agree with. By and far, most of the country is safe. However, you may know that you need to prepare your traveler for the risk environment. If they're going to Mexico City, well, Mexico City is the kidnap, ransom, and extortion capital of the world, and Americans tend to be targets in Mexico City. So, does your organization purchase a kidnap and ransom insurance policy? What are they going to do if someone is held for ransom? I mean, again, low likelihood, very high severity. These are the kinds of things that are going on. How do you understand what's going on in the risk environment? How is that individual traveler prepared? If you're going to someplace with significantly different climate or temperature, and that person is diabetic or has their own medical issues, your body can behave significantly different to the environment, to the food, but to the climate, to the temperature, in a different location and a different place. And the individual traveler needs to be aware of that, but the organization has a burden in and of itself to make sure that traveler is appropriately prepared for that environment. What about specific travelers? Well, there are certain places in the world where it's much more difficult to be a female traveler than a male traveler. You know, not only from a harassment and assault perspective, but just the cultural norms there. So there are things that people need to be aware of. You know, when something actually does happen, where are your people? What are they doing? What have they been trained to do? How have they been trained to respond? So that's the traveler level, but then what does headquarters do? Who actually answers the phone when there's a 12-hour time difference? Is the person that answers the phone, do they actually know what they're doing and how to respond to make sure that that person needs care? If you take it to the furthest extreme, if someone becomes severely ill or injured and they need to be medically evacuated or a security evacuation needs to happen, how do you manage that logistically? And then lastly, all of this sounds gigantically expensive because it can be. How do you pay for all of these things? I know it seems like an incredibly daunting task, but you know, there are free avenues out there, and there are things, resources and advantages you're not taking care of. You're probably not taking advantage of. Many of your existing insurances for the organizational level that cover your international operations, they're going to have assistance services built in, so they're going to help your travelers get their care. They could even go so far as pay for a medical or security evacuation. There are lots of free resources out there to help international travelers and organizations planning to go international prepare for that, including OSAC, which is the Overseas Security Advisory Council, and the Department of State. And also many vendors out there are willing to do what they call no-cost master services agreements, which basically it's a free retainer. So they'll be there to meet your needs if you need them, and the retainer has no cost. You only pay them when you incur their services. So I am right at 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone, and I'll be around for Q&A.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. A couple questions came in for you too, so we'll circle back on those. Our last but not least, to my right or left, depending on your perspective, is Leighton Weston. He's the Global Accounts Director at CreditSafe, based in Europe, but also based in the U.S., and really you do business in over 100 countries.
Yes. So
tell us about credit risk and that part and beyond for business owners.
Perfect. Well, there's two items that I'm going to concentrate on today. One is how long does it actually take you to get paid? One of the most important things when doing business, and then talking a little bit about global due diligence and global compliance when you're actually doing business overseas. So the first slide you're going to see here is, on average, how long does it actually take companies to pay bills in different continents across the world? So you'd be very surprised to know that Africa, on average, it takes companies 52 days to actually pay their invoices. When you look in then, the scale kind of slowly goes down. I've put it that way on purpose. So you can look at the better parts of the world as far as getting paid are concerned. So if you're looking at Africa, Middle East, South America, on average, they're paying their bills 35 days at minimum beyond the due date. So when you're looking to do business in these areas, you've got to have a plan in place to either look at that DBT, look at your DSO, and make sure that you're making a plan based around that. When you're looking at Europe and North America at the other end, still the average is around 14, 15 days beyond terms. Next slide up is showing you currently the worst places in the world to do business. Now you're going to see at the top of that list, you've got Palestine during 2017, 2016. There was a lot of things going on in Palestine which probably drove that up a bit further. But when you're looking at some of the other areas there, you're looking at a lot of Africa and the Middle East. We've got one there in Asia, one there in South America that have become, this is the worst of the worst list of the worst paying countries in the world. So this is an important part when you're looking to do business in a country, something that you take a look at. Can you afford as a company to receive a bill 97 days beyond its due date? In a lot of cases, probably not. There's a lot of ways that you can combat this, and part of my job is educating companies on where to get data. These days, a lot of data is available free. My friend Trevor over at Lynx will probably tell you that. If you're looking at doing business in the UK, if you're looking at doing business in the Netherlands, if you're doing business with global companies, all of that data is available free. You can strip financial statements from any company in the UK that you want right now, and you can do it free of charge. It was made completely free as of last year You go into Company's House, you can download credit safes accounts in the next 5 minutes, and it's not going to cost you a penny. SEC data, yes, it's a pain in the neck to download it all and read it all the majority of the time, but it is available. And when you are doing business overseas, you've got to get your hands on that data. An area I do concentrate on as well is Asia. There is a lot of data available in Asia. If a company, for example, in South Korea is exporting more than $1.2 million or the equivalent of, they're actually legally obligated to file a full P&L with a filing house in South Korea. So that data is also accessible. Yes, it does cost a little bit, but that data is ready and available. I'll go on to the next slide. Standardization of data. What you're actually looking at right now are 4 credit reports in 4 different continents of the world. One thing that our company is trying to do is standardize data across the globe so that you don't have to be a financial professional or a professional in anything really to understand a credit report these days or understand any form of due diligence. So one's in Peru, I believe. My eyes are not very good for me today. One of the reports there is in Mexico. I believe one's in Argentina and one is somewhere else, but I can't see it. But don't be scared to try and access this data. It's standardized at filing houses these days, and the data is readily available for everyone to go after and find it and see it. Ready for the next one? Perfect. So there's 3 different types of risk that I always get people to concentrate on looking at. You've got financial risk. So you're looking at, can a company sustain doing business with me as a supplier point of view? You're looking at, can my customer actually afford to pay me? So there's, as it says, there are various types of risk associated with doing business with companies, but that data is readily available and you can make educated decisions. The next 2 is what I'm going to concentrate on a little bit more, regulatory and reputational risk. What impact in doing business with a bad company is it going to have on you? I had one client, it was around 6 months ago. They were in the oil and gas industry specifically. They sold nearly $250,000 worth of oil to a company currently sat on the OFAC sanctions list. Not only did they lose all the oil, they also had to give back the $250,000 to the company as well because they could not be seen to be taking money off of anyone on a sanctions list. Very easily avoidable. All of that data, once again, it's also available for free. If you want to scale through the OFAC sanctions list, you can go down through that anytime you want, and it's online available for free. Yes, it's just a pain in the neck to go through it all. Reputational risk, you're looking at, I believe there's over 300 people sat in prison right now in Saudi Arabia because of accepting bribes and essentially using their titles to get better business done. If you would do business with any of those companies right now, it could look very bad on your company, especially with the big guys right now. You had the company down in Brazil, JSA, I believe, got in a lot of trouble. And what you can do very basically, just by knowing your stuff, is avoid all of that. Avoid any sort of risk coming your way, any bit of bad names coming across. What I've included here is some of the governing bodies that actually come after you for these kinds of things. OFAC is going to be the biggest name on this list. That's the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. You need to make sure that your product or your services are not falling under the govern of OFAC. I'll use another example here. There was a company that made small little parts that were actually, they can be used in homemade bombs. So whoever they're selling their small little components to, they need to make sure that they've never been involved with any terrorism. You know, it doesn't come up very often, but if it does, you can be in a lot of trouble, not only because you're actually doing it and supplying it, but these guys will come after you eventually. But it can all be avoided very simply. And that was my 5 minutes. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We only do have 5 more minutes, and we have many more questions than what we can do in 5 minutes. So for those of you that we don't get to your questions, we'll follow up with each one of the speakers and post this on a blog with the entire 1 hour as well. And so hopefully you'll be able to use that. One of the questions I think that builds off of what you talked about, Leighton, and also a little bit about Mike and several of the other speakers talked about are these free resources that are out there. And you, in fact, you even said it's a bit of a pain in the butt, or I forget exactly what your Welshian phrase was. It's a pain to do it if you don't know about it. It's a pain for you because you know all about it. So what does someone like Anurag or any business owner, how do we wade into something like this? Do they just give you a call and help?
Yes, you give me a call. Essentially what I sell is centralizing all of these data resources and putting them in a nice, easy to read format for people. But I don't really, I speak to a lot of companies that are going out using my competitors, and I'll say, for example, if you try and buy a credit report in the UK in America, companies try and charge you $100, $200 to go and download that document for you, put it in a nice, easy to read format, when that resource is completely free. All you're actually paying for is someone's time. So I'll always give the resources away for free, especially to newer, smaller companies that have smaller needs. The area where I would then step in and try and do something with a company is if they're trying to do everything in batch or trying to do it in bulk. I can facilitate having the data feeds directly to them and make everything easier for them.
Okay, very cool. Mike, in your case, you talked about like free State Department resources and things like that. How should someone navigate it? And again, do we just kind of go to you and maybe as a starting point? And are you willing to maybe help direct some people with some of the more basic stuff?
Absolutely. I am more than willing to help point people in the right direction or just offer them advice. Of those items that I pointed out, OSAC, the first one, the Overseas Advisory Council, is actually, I think there might be 50,000 members of that, and that is governmental. So they host a series of free events across the United States throughout the year, and they actually have subsectors dedicated to different industries. So that can be really, really informative to anybody that is trying to dip their toe in the water, so to say. So again, that's the Overseas Security Advisory Council. Again, and there are many, many other free resources out there, and I'd be happy to point people in the appropriate direction if they just want to reach out to me.
Yeah, we've just got a couple minutes left, and so let me just open the floor to all the speakers. Is there anything that, now having heard everything, that in 20 or 30 seconds you'd like to mention that wasn't mentioned, or maybe you forgot to mention it, or something else that occurred to you, while we've been speaking? Whether it's Meredith out at Emergent Risk, or Mike, thank you for sharing that information, Trevor at Lynx, and Phyllis at Tempus, or Anurag, I think you may be still driving now. And anything else that we should know?
Detailed about your risk assessment. So oftentimes you'll find these big colorful maps, then Tanzania's red and Kenya's orange and maybe Egypt's green, right? And I think all of us today have started to explain how we're trying to pick away at that and be a little bit more detailed and nuanced about the ground truth in the particular market that you're trying to do business, because risk is so variable and culturally specific, as Anurag mentioned. So yeah, I think just being nuanced and detailed in our analysis is something I'd like to point out, I think.
Yeah, that's we don't have time to do that, but Anurag, I'm going to circle back with you and all of you with the question of how does an owner manage risk, right? Every decision has risk associated with it, and so what's your own personal threshold, and how do you make some decisions? And a lot of times we learn, from making mistakes, and sometimes we learn from making some good decisions, at least those of you that have made good decisions. I'd like to wrap it up because we're right at the witching hour, so we will circle back with all our speakers. If you're watching this and you'd like to contact any of them, I saw information from Lynx, their email, but this will all be in the blog post, where in the next week or so. And if in the meantime you want to reach out to anybody, info@globalchamber.org, and we'll be happy to connect you up if you can't find the person in the directory. The next couple things that we have coming up, there's 2 events next week. February 20th, Women in Global Leadership. A pretty extraordinary group of women who are speaking, including the founder of Athena International. Really honored to have Martha Mertz and 4 other tremendous women. The next day, on the 21st, we're going to be talking about factoring for global businesses. And then in March, we have banking, international banking. We have an exporter keynote. And then coming up, we've got a NAFTA trade event. We've got an event on the Middle East. We've got an event on the business of jazz. And then coming up right after that are international law, international marketing, and international logistics. And we have several logistics folks here in our Scottsdale office today. Thank you for everybody for watching. Watch for the video and the information afterwards. Speakers, you're amazing.